Let's see. So Jason shifted. He had this thing come up, and so I'm going to jump into hosting this one and going from being a participant to the organizer. So, and I'm pretty good at just flowing with things. So if you all are good with flowing with things, then I think that's what we should do, because I think we're all in the same line of work, which is, making food accessible to people. So that's the main takeaway here. But let's go real quick. I think we should just go around the Brady Bunch windows here and just get a quick insight as to who each person is, just so we all know each other. And I'll just go Megan, Amy, and then Drew, just kind of clockwise according to my window.
Hi, I'm Megan Kinney. I'm the Director of Cooperative Distribution for the North Coast Growers Association up here in Humboldt County, California. So part of that role is that I'm the director of our new food hub that we call Harvest Hub.
And what year are you guys in, Megan?
We're just still in our first year. We started piloting last March and we fully launched in August. So we haven't really been fully operational for a full year yet.
Awesome. Okay, cool.
Okay, I'm Amy Newcomb. I own and operate an certified organic farm of 18 acres out in Willow Creek in Humboldt County with my husband. We sell direct to consumer primarily and a couple of local co-ops, and also on the advisory committee of the Food Hub, a big proponent of the Food Hub, the North Coast Growers Association. We've been with the North Coast Growers Association for, I think, about 25 years.
I'm Drew Zucchino. I'm with a food distribution center in Spruce Pine, North Carolina, aka Food Hub. It's called Tractor Food and Farms. We're in our 11th year. We work with on average, about 60 farms a year, but our network extends over 220 farms across Western North Carolina and some into Tennessee and Virginia. And in South Carolina a little bit.
Cool. And then I'm Chris Jagger. I've got Blue Fox Farm in Southern Oregon, and I've been here for 20 plus years now, growing vegetables on various scales. I dipped out of the food production world for a couple of years, and this season I'm back into it. And then I got hired by two of our food advocacy groups in the area to work on building out a food hub for our small valley here in the Applegate Valley. And I'm just not settled with just putting in plug and play what our food hub should be. I want to look and see what it actually needs to be. And so honestly, that's where the idea came from, hearing Jason talk with Drew on the Doomer Optimist podcast. That episode, I knew that you were going to come on there, Drew. And so I was like, oh, this is a perfect opportunity to have a seasoned food hub on, and then one that's just starting with the North Coast. And then myself, which is like the nascent early, like the beginning parts of what a food hub might be. I thought it might be a really interesting perspective for us to all kind of share some notes. I'm a real nuts and bolts kind of guy. Being a farmer, I like the 40,000 foot view is important, but I also am really interested in what works and what doesn't work. So I thought it would be really and then other side context. I've known the Newcombs for probably 20 plus years now too. So we've all been in this Northwest kind of growers circle for a long time. So it was kind of cool to see that they were involved with this at the same time as we're trying to kind of figure out what we're doing up here in Southern Oregon. That's the initial takeaway as to why I kind of wanted to put this together today. I think maybe the best place to start would be with you, Drew, where when you did that episode of the Doomer Optimist with Jason, you guys kind of talked about the higher level of, why the food hub and what you guys are up to there in the South. But from your perspective, I would just love to hear what really drove the tractor organization to first really form and get flowing in the beginning. Like, what do you, I know you haven't been there for that whole time, but maybe tell us some of the history of what really prompted it to get created in the first place.
Yeah, sure. Again, it's gone through a couple iterations, and some of this will be just a repeat of what I spoke with Jason about. But where I live, there's a lot of there's been a lot of extraction from the soil. It's very steep. There's not these kind of vast flat landscapes, even hilly. It's pretty. This is like the central Appalachia. Pretty a lot of cliffs and poor soils. So I think when as the industry of food and agriculture like centralized, this place was obviously the first to feel it because there wasn't that much of an ability to adapt. Um, tobacco was king around here for a long time, and it supported a lot of families and a lot of farmers. And they were able to make a living off that, and it was guaranteed. It was subsidized, and it was it was a guaranteed market, and then it wasn't. So you had an entire community that grew in monoculture, but obviously had food food gardens, and had lived kind of off the grid before it was a thing. People, there were roads here that, for example, the road I'm on now wasn't paved until the 80s, and it's a pretty populated place. So there was this sense of urgency surrounding a creative solution to centralizing food and ag 10 years ago, and where probably 15 or 20 years ago, and there were resources kind of provided by the state in the form of trusts and foundations, trying to lead the entire state out of its sort of reliance on the tobacco market. The food hub model, or an aggregation model, made sense up here as a kind of let's give it a shot. There wasn't much else to do. You couldn't, much like, or unlike kind of Oregon and the West Coast, there was no, hey, let's go into cannabis or anything like that, or let's talk about it. It's still not a reality here. And several years ago they tried to turn it on, and then the West Coast just flooded the market. It's kind of just like, hey, don't even try it. What are you kidding? We've been doing this for 50 years, 30 years. So why why are you gonna try to dip into this? So yeah, I hope that explains it. Just kind of base level. There were a lot of people looking for an outlet that didn't want to move to a city and get some kind of desk job. It just wasn't in them. They wanted to keep farming, and that's what we ended up with. And it started with kind of being driven by economic development, but there's a holistic picture that really wasn't being presented up front. But it takes a while to figure out what farmers really need and how to give it to them. And yeah, if I have any advice, it's just be patient with the network, build it. There's gonna be people who aren't on board, and there will be people who are. There'll be people who come back around. There will be conventional farmers, there will be organic farmers, there will be dogmatic people, there will be whatever works. It really is, because what you end up finding is just there's a lot of values that aren't presented to us in the ethos and in the dominant culture. You sort of have to unearth them, which is a crazy, awesome experience. And I highly recommend it for anybody. You just have to have a lot of patience and sometimes, I guess, yeah, just a little bit of a high tolerance for risk. But farmers are good at that, right? They do it every day.
Well, and I think it's really interesting too, because what you said as far as the creation was based on economics, and as tobacco went away, and how the area and the culture looked towards are there other crops like the cannabis and hemp thing? It's really interesting that you say that. Then you mention what the West Coast. That's some of the reason why we're looking to rebuild into a food hub here, is because now we've seen in my area, which was dominated by cannabis and hemp, that whole industry has gone away for the most part. There's still parts of it around. And so when I read on your guys' history on your site, it was like, oh, this food hub was created out of the downturn of the tobacco industry as there's a consolidation of tobacco industry happened. I was like, oh, just replace cannabis, with tobacco there. And that's exactly what's happening in our area now. So it's really interesting, some of the modeling that I'm doing right now as far as thinking about how this food hub here would work is based on tapping into the land that's being held by a lot of ex-cannabis growers because they've stepped away from the industry because it's flooded. And how can I get those people still involved in agriculture, which is really interesting, because talk about a cultural gap. It's pretty wild, but people are open to it because what some people are starting to learn now is that it's not just what plant they were growing. It's more about they just really enjoy being in the soil and being in the earth. And so now I'm starting to iterate on like, well, what would that look like? And I think that might be an easy transition for you, Amy, because you guys have very similar cultural experiences to what we have here in Southern Oregon with the whole cannabis movement and how that's involved with all this.
I just want to add the one thing that because I'm a big advocate of a lot of people now, cannabis wise, are allowed to fallow a certain amount until the market comes back. The one thing that's different here is that they are so highly regulated with their water use and they are also growing in very marginal areas, like in the forest. And so it's not as easy of a transition or a kind of like talk it up, because they have really high regulations on their water. They have to they're not allowed to pull from the creeks that they're on for a certain amount of time, from like November till, they can only pull from November till May. And so they kind of look at it and say like, well, I don't really have the water to do those kinds of food production, which is kind of a bummer, but they're also not really in great farming areas. Like that's not where the cannabis is grown here. It's still grown up in the hills.
Yeah. And so that's very different than what we have like here
Right.
in Southern Oregon, where I'm at, along the river valley, and we have the established water rights. And so it kind of creates a different ball game. Amy, for you guys, with the creation of your food hub, what was the impetus for creating the food hub there in Northern California, and like what drove you guys to look into doing this?
Well, it's been a dream for like 20 years. It's been talked about as just basically a place to aggregate and have, rather than 20 different restaurateurs coming through getting their stuff. We always dreamed about it being in one place and then being able to order it, and then them getting it all from one place, many different farmers. That's always kind of been a conundrum. So it was like talked about for the restaurants, and then it was talked about for, like, we have a university, Cal Poly Humboldt is there, and the schools. And so there was just like a lot of interest of like, we want your products, we want your produce, but how do we get it easily and efficiently? And so it was kind of like the technology almost kind of had to catch up. And then the pandemic hit, and Megan is an amazing instigator of all of this. She and a couple of other people that work at NCGA just kind of like grabbed the bull by the horns during the pandemic, and were able to actually manifest this dream that we've all had as farmers for 20 plus years, and start the ball rolling and get a bunch of funding from California.
So that was one of those pandemic kind of experiences that has like a positive ending, as opposed to, because there were so many that were happening during the pandemic that was like, we all thought that was like the big shift in local food production for the whole country. And then we saw on the tail end of the pandemic, so much just went back to business as usual. So were you leery of that, Megan, when you were first starting, or was there just enough funding that you were just like, you could just steamroll the whole concept and find momentum?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a concern. However, our region is also very remote. So just even in normal times when there weren't food shortages across the entire country, it's always a little bit more difficult to get food out here. Everything's a little bit more expensive because it has to travel much farther. We're not located along an interstate. We've got a couple 2-lane highways that come in and out of our county, and that's it. And they do have to go up and through mountains. So there have been several times that every single one of those distribution routes have been closed and we sort of become a little island, even when there's not a pandemic or national crisis happening. So I found that even though local food, the sort of belief seems to be like local food is a little bit more expensive than regular food, but out here, just because even, Cisco food has to come up and over the mountains. So something that we've seen in our schools, last year someone was telling me that our organic dry farmed heirloom tomatoes were cheaper or on par with what Cisco was able to provide and was just so much higher quality. So just I feel like the businesses out here really appreciate what we're doing. They all really, and schools also really want to support our local farmers. So the transition's been really easy, and it seems like people are in it for the long haul. So
Yeah, it seems like geography plays a pretty big part in the success or failure. Like it's almost a negative for us to get this thing off the ground here because we are along the I-5 corridor. That almost makes it more challenging because we're up against everybody, Is that something that you guys are dealing with, Drew, down there? Is geography play a part in the success or failure of what you guys have created?
Our situation is similar to what Megan just spoke to, in that it's pretty clear, and it became even more apparent during the pandemic and when the supply chain was kind of squeezed. It was just so it was very obvious that the only that we were like the last ones on the list to get stuff. People were just sort of people were shopping. Like our closest urban center is Asheville, and there's a local grocery, not local, I should say. It's a corporate grocery, but it's kind of the regional one. For example, the produce there was of decent quality in Asheville, but then you would drive like 45 minutes to Burnsville or Spruce Pine, and you would just see a rapid decline in the quality. And so you're able to take advantage of that if you have a product, particularly when the playing field in terms of cost starts to level. Particularly if you can do it with commodity. Because most people are commodity shopping in rural areas. Like there still are those like local food systems where you can get, you still have access to, but your gardens and your neighbors' gardens, but people are buying 5-10 pound bags of potatoes, for example. And if you can compete with price there, you're going to win in quality every time. And then once that individual makes a connection that like they see the field out their window, or they know the farmer, which is easy to do in rural places because people still rely on each other. Then if there is any fluctuation in price, they're going to look at it and say, like, it's hard not to do this in just like living in capitalism, but saying like, is my relationship with this person, now that I've made it, worth like a 25 cent increase per pound on potato? And most people are going to be like, yeah, it is worth it. I'm going to stick with this relationship. So we've certainly leveraged that, and keep a close eye on it too, on what's missing. Cause I'm still shopping, our staff and our farmers are still shopping at the grocery store. And it's kind of like this topic of conversation is like, what's trash there? Where can we, have an edge? And because we are more adaptable, they can't talk to a farmer and say, make this change or grow cherry tomatoes instead of heirlooms. We can. I mean, we can make that happen within a year. It's not going to happen from a produce manager standpoint, going up the chain to whoever their regional procurement person is, and then talking to probably two more intermediaries before they even get to the farm. That's the exciting part. But geography, yeah, it is ultimately the foundation of that concept. It's like our limitation is our power in a lot of ways.
You mentioned commodities. So is that then, would you say that that's what you guys have focused on? As far as like, have you found that the model works best with having, say, 5 to 10 flagship crops that are focused on commodities to get that volume in there? Or is it just across the board everything?
It does sort of depend on the markets, but generally, in the markets we're in, yeah, keeping commodity costs down but still high quality is kind of like that's the hook, that's what gets people interested. is if you can, sell high volume, but also have like specialty on the other end. And sometimes, we don't have all of our commodity kind of fruits and vegetables. There's other versions of them too, like our cheaper ones might be conventional, but there's also like a biodynamic one grown on like a quarter acre on an off-grid farm. And we're able to market that as well. It's just like we wouldn't send that to a food bank that's buying or to a restaurant or something like that, unless it was specifically asked for. So having that kind of like diverse, multiple versions of the same thing, but not strictly focusing on like 10 commodities from like one single farmer. Diversifying and keeping that adaptability. I'm curious. I don't have too much experience out west, United States West, but do y'all feel like? And I don't have any experience with cannabis production, not legally at least. So, do you feel like there's because from what I understand, it requires like a lot of kind of like agri-technology. There's a lot of plastic involved and a lot of like science. That's not true.
From my experience, and I think Amy can speak to this as well. Like I think both of our farms have experienced hemp and cannabis in some form over the last decade, and our biggest push has been all of those thinking of agri-tech kind of techniques are complete BS. Like that you can grow in the ground, in the soil, and we've worked hard. That's like one of the biggest things as a vegetable grower that I pushed was all of this can be done. You can treat it just like a vegetable. There's no reason it can't be treated like a vegetable. And this like babying this plant along. Now, are there super high tech, really experienced growers that do things that you can't do elsewhere? Yeah, of course. But there's also like, greenhouse growers in Holland that focus on the highest quality peppers and tomatoes in the world too. But that doesn't stop me from field growing, dry farmed, early girls or whatever. So there is this whole realm of cannabis. It started in the mountains, of Nepal or whatever, and throughout. So it's very it's a reason it's called weed,
So that's not a competitive advantage, really. That there might be people with pretty integrated experience with tunnels and greenhouses.
Not in my perspective. I mean, like a lot of us that are growing cannabis outdoor, sun grown, plastic free. We're trying to keep the movement like craft beer, craft cider. It's craft cannabis, sun grown. So there's like your limitation is your advantage kind of situation where you're saying like, hey, this plant grows amazing in the sun without all of that tech. And there is science that does prove that with the terpene analysis and that kind of thing.
Also, I just think you're seeing the same thing with the industrialization of our food system, where you start monocropping larger and larger amounts, you get more and more pests, so you're trying to control the environment more. So I think that's where that sort of myth is coming from, these larger grows that you see that need to employ that because they're doing it on such a large scale that you can't be giving each plant the attention it needs and deserves.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's some interesting context there. I asked because it's kind of like in our area, still with kind of these like economic development initiatives, that's where they kind of, people with investment dollars really don't know anything about agriculture, but somehow it's ended up to where like, how do we use technology to become competitive again? Like that's a regional take here. And I'm trying to educate on that. And I think like, I feel like whenever I see that it, that works, right? That's a good thing, right? Like all of this plastic and, all of this technology, in development in agricultural technology, like that's what's going to save us or make it work here in a geographically kind of constricting place. I always like, I sort of intuitively push back on that, but really I don't feel like we know, right? But I think some voices from out west, they do know based on kind of how far it's gone there, particularly in the sense of like preserving water, and in that technical aspect of it, of farming.
It's a culturally weird plant. I'll say that, because it's grown out of the standard way to produce it was grown out of the fact that it started in the shade of culture, I guess is the best way to say it. And so a lot of those techniques came out of the need to be discreet about it. And so that was like these indoor techniques and lighting. And then like you saw the entire support industry, which was amendments and fertilizers and inputs and crop protectants and all of that came out of being in these discrete environments where you had to have ultimate control, both plant growth wise as well as socially, culturally, all of that. And so now as the plant is kind of like culturally more free in some ways, and that's a whole other podcast to debate whether that's true or not, but then now we're seeing that the plant is just put back into the realm of just being a plant again. And so it's really interesting now. You will see a mix of veggie gardens that have a small part of that play a role in their crop production, but it's not like it used to be, and that's okay, I think, because you're seeing people that are being like, I don't have to do anything with it. It's just growing right alongside my tomatoes, my peppers, my eggplant, and everything. So it's kind of exciting, but we're also watching so much of it, especially in the hemp realm, become such a commodity crop again, and so it's really interesting watching it unfold. And that kind of like shifts into then the whole food hub concept here that's why I'm like trying to investigate of like, okay, can I get some of these hemp and cannabis farmers to implement a rotation so they don't have the pest pressures and they're not mining the same minerals out of the same soil because of the same plant year after year? Can we start putting successions of commodity vegetable crops, commodity meaning like things that are bulky crops, cucumbers, melons, tomatoes, potatoes, onions, even proteins like animals, like rotating animals on your property? Can we come up with a system that makes sense to put all of this together that then as a hub we can aggregate that movement and distribute? So that's kind of where we're at. I just keep coming back to that same premise and trying to figure that out.
Have you had meetings with some of the growers, Chris, like discussions about it?
Yeah, so I'm a big advocate for one-on-one discussion and not group meetings because so many people. So that's the other thing that's very interesting. We're in a food movement, which I call like local foods 3.0 here in Southern Oregon. 1.0 was the original Back to the Land movement. 2.0 was the farm to table movement, for lack of better like blanket statements. And then we saw, and this is some generalizations here, but I think most people would agree. Then we saw the greenwashing out of that happen, which was a bunch of restaurants, a bunch of end user vendors like grocery stores and whatnot, and CSA customers being end users, all got burned because everybody was trying to do the right thing, but nobody really wanted to have to deal with the hard side of local food productions. And so everybody kind of got burned. And then the producers all kind of got burned out on having meetings. And so now as I'm coming back around this time, I'm approaching it from like I'm doing the legwork myself as a one-on-one thing, because you get a lot more honest answer than in these group dynamics where everybody's just trying to say what they think is what they're supposed to say. To make everybody, it's like the classic, like everybody's one-upping each other, trying to be more sustainable than the other person. And we were like, no, that's not actually that important. Like, I mean, sure, we all want to work towards that, but like, I want to find out what people really want and what they want to do to find for lack of better words and sounding cheesy, but I've been asking the farmers I'm interviewing one-on-one, it's like, what do you want to do to bring joy back into your life? Because right now I'm seeing there's a darkness among people because they've been in this groove for so long. And it's not just cannabis farmers, it's also produce farmers, it's also fruit farmers, it's also animal farmers. What do you want to make things work better for you? And the main takeaway is people don't want to have to grind 24/7. They want to have flexibility to be able to interact with their families and have a life outside of just pushing. And so that's why some of this modeling that I'm doing with this food hub concept is like, okay, well, what if I, instead of picking 45 crops for you to grow and 8 successions of each, let's pick 3 to 5 crops and 3 to 4 successions throughout the season. What would that look like? So that's my approach right now.
Is your the formation of your food hub affiliated with the food bank there, or like who are you contract growing for?
So that's the biggest question right now, is the food banks in our area have some bandwidth, but their funding is so volatile right now because a lot of their money currently is still leftover money from COVID era, but they are all in this state of uncertainty to know whether that funding is going to continue. And then we have a couple other big food advocacy groups. They're doing work in that realm that are open to buying produce, but they're just getting started as well. So that's the biggest question I have right now, is it's a chicken egg kind of scenario, is like, I'm looking for what I call a whale. Like, who is the whale in our area that is willing to commit to say, the road's going to be bumpy for the first X amount of years, but we're committed to supporting this. So then I can go back to the growers and say, okay, now I have a crop plan that I can implement, because I can't implement a crop plan until I know that I have an end user, right?
Yeah, and definitely don't do that if you can avoid it. That was a big, like, in the early stages, there were like all of that economic development. It would do everything. Like, it would provide technical training, provide boxes, trucks. It would not buy food. And so at the end of the day, like, we had everything we needed to make it work, but it didn't matter because the market wasn't there. And what would end up happening is, like, the way the hub had been designed is like, oh, it's going to be like, quote unquote, sustainable after 5 years. And by taking a 20% markup on all of this produce as the intermediary. But as prices continued to drop and the industry continued to scale, there were so many farmers who just weren't getting paid or weren't getting paid enough. So the whole point was just like, it was charity work for these farmers, essentially. Like, they were propping up a nonprofit, which, was putting out all of these philosophies surrounding equity, right, and regenerative farming, but nobody was getting paid, so it didn't matter. And I think that's really what it comes down to, is like, is finding the markets and catering to them. And somebody's got to do that while everyone else is working really hard on a farm to start. And sometimes you kind of gotta work sometimes you have to work a little harder to make it easier in the future, and that can be a hard sell with farmers. But if you're able to pay them and show them a little piece, like, it doesn't matter if you buy like $10,000 or $30,000, or 300 or 3 million. Once, like, there's a couple farmers that get paid right, word gets out, and then those people start talking, and they're like, this is the philosophy, is like, there's actually some power behind it. It's not just, we're not just talking about, organic. We're not talking about like God and nature here. We're talking about like trying to survive in this world, and we have something to offer. And I think everybody feels that in the community, particularly once you start connecting the people growing with the food with the people who are eating it, and consuming it, like, within that community. You can gather all those people and go to, like, a health provider and say, you're paying for all this all these medical expenses for people with heart disease and diabetes in this community. And coincidentally, they're also farmers or from farm families. Let's cut a deal to get some value out of this. There's all kinds of directions you can go. And once that gets rolling, it's pretty downhill from there. Downhill as in like easy going. Sorry, not like not bad.
Yeah, so I think that was one of our benefits out here was that, like Amy said, for 20 something years, farmers have been talking about creating a food hub, and there was never really an operator or anyone who stepped up to take it. And then in 2020, when the pandemic came, we started a multi-farm CSA because as NCGA is sort of like the organization that operates all the farmers markets. So we already had relationships with the farmers. We knew they were already planting for a full farmers market season, but we weren't sure if our farmers markets were going to get shut down. We weren't really sure what was happening. So we started this multi-farm CSA, and, there was just always more food to be purchased wholesale. All of a sudden, the farmers saw NCGA as a buyer as well as like a support system for the farmers markets. And yeah, like you're saying, we were able to pay them. We were able to move more food. We were finding new programs to connect with. And then we were doing all the purchasing and ordering. And then as that happened, our Office of Education saw that and started joining the conversation about a food hub. The food bank saw that and started joining the conversation. So it really started out of this packing boxes into a larger scale conversation about, oh, this is actually something that could make sense now that there is that person in the middle who's willing to do that work and run around and, set up this makeshift box packing station outside in the sand dunes every week to pack these boxes to make it to the point that now we have a food hub and it's really easy for farmers.
The multi-farm CSA is a great starting point. It really does. Like it just shows. I think it shows farmers like a level of respect that they could never see in the middle supply chain. Like I think it's something that, I'm only 35, but it just feels like it feels like an old culture for some reason. I don't know why. But it feels like a systematic respect that just doesn't exist in agriculture anymore. And it's pretty easy to bring back. Like if you have 10 customers, in a pickup truck, like you can make it happen, and build from there because once you get those voices going, particularly within tight knit farm communities, it goes a long way. But I think the easy model is like, you don't have any grant restrictions, right? You don't have some buyer that's like, no, make the cucumber smaller, no, pack them in this box, or they're out of spec. Like you are in control of everything as a distributor. If someone says like, if someone can call you and say like, these cucumbers were yellow, it's like, yeah, the variety is yellow. It's a yellow variety. Like a mid supply chain would be like, we dumped them in the trash and you're not getting paid. Like that's, so you kind of like, you can start building systems around that, of responding to the consumers on behalf of the farmers and starting to play like ultimately like a more informed intermediary between those two. And that's where you really start gaining some respect and giving some respect.
Was there a point, Drew, where you all kind of felt the momentum shift? And there, I'm assuming there wasn't just a event that you found that like escape velocity. I'm assuming it was just the being patient with it. I mean, I'm just always curious, like how, as somebody else that's out there trying to create a similar aggregation model, like how long do you stick with it,
Gosh, yeah. I think it's difficult for me to answer that question because I had been in 2019, I started as like the kind of like the farm services person. And then 2020, it was 2 weeks before before COVID really, it was March of 2020 is when I started. So there was a lot of pivoting going on. And I've been told, I don't know this for sure, but like I was put in place to dissolve the organization. It was like at that point. But kind of like using COVID as like a market and recognizing those gaps, like it felt like almost immediate. It was just because of the landscape like the pandemic created. There was a lot to suddenly there were places to move to use our infrastructure and equipment, and then we kind of started adding staff, and we had a strategy in that of like we were looking for people with farm experience, and that came from farm families. We were not like seeking out liberal arts degrees, and we were looking for people like from the very community that knew people that were connected, that would be able to start a business or a church there and already have a network to bring with them. But particularly farmers who understood kind of like the pace, had an inherent or existing knowledge of what quality was, or what it meant to be a farmer, and how to communicate with farmers too, and how to set expectations and boundaries, and so I think those were having the pandemic as a landscape, and then also just having people with skills and talent kind of approach us with interest, and then finding a place for them. We really we try to hire people, not positions, is kind of our thing, and it's worked pretty well so far. So that's I mean, everyone plays a role in the food system, so everyone has something to offer. It kind of changes every year, every season we go through some kind of shedding and or rebirth.
Sort of like slow and intentional growth. I feel like that was I'm sure Amy sort of experienced this in our advisory committee, where some of our members would say, oh, like, what about this market and this market and this market? And we said, like, hey, we just started piloting our systems. This is our trajectory. We don't just want to open up to everyone all at once and realize that our systems aren't in place. So, this is our stage 1 and this is our stage 2. And then we're going to open up to that market that you mentioned. And I feel like our farmers are super receptive to that because, like, you guys are patient. You put some seeds in the ground and you have to wait for them to grow. And you realize that there is that like tending to the relationship for that whole time. Just really putting value on that slow, intentional growth and not trying to do everything as soon as you open is really important.
Definitely. And I feel we're very fortunate here when we're establishing the food hub, because we've already had a really good relationship with the food bank here. There's some women that got together and called themselves Locally Delicious about 10 years ago and started fundraising to give contract grows to local farmers. And so that kind of got the ball rolling, and the food bank has a gleaning program. And so that relationship, we have some great executive directors in our food bank up here. And so that relationship alone was crucial for us to get this going. They support us, we support them in so many different ways. And then the education component, Megan's working really hard to get Cal Poly Humboldt on board. So, and then they're also on the back end. The one thing that Megan and her crew are doing is really working with the farmers to scale up. Like, what does that mean? How does that look on your farm? And it's really exciting to have that kind of support with the agricultural programs that the North Coast Growers Association has. We've just grown so much into that role, and people really, really appreciate it in our community.
So you all have a roadmap, Megan, as far as an organization, like this is a general direction we want to head, or are you setting it up in a systematic like goal setting and that kind of structure?
Yeah. And, the goalposts always shift, especially when talking about local food, but there's definitely at least a rough scaling up of, making sure that we have our appropriate systems in place and that these are working before we move to the next stage and something, and then really evaluating what happened during the last stage to inform, is this next stage that we talked about really the next step we want to take, or do we maybe want to like shift towards a different direction. One of the things we decided to shift this year is just working with a lot of the local schools, because obviously schools love fruit. In California, you have to have at least 2 different servings of different types of fruit every single day for the children. However, our growing season, we've got some melons in August. We've got our plum and apple and pear season. But for a lot of our school season, there's not really any fruit here. And tons of vegetables. And some of our schools aren't equipped to really process down a lot of those vegetables. So that took us on this minimally processed sort of route now, where we're looking into investing into things like cabbage shredders, so we can really take seconds or these ugly pieces of vegetables and shred them down into cabbage that could be usable, or maybe carrot sticks that can be served in after school programs. Being able to freeze or freeze dry fruit in the height of the season over the summer and be able to serve it to schools over the winter. And that was never anything that I had even considered. I was like, yeah, maybe 5 years down the road, we'll start looking into a commercial kitchen. But just working and hearing with the schools really just sort of shifted that trajectory and moved it way forward for us.
That's a hot item right now. That's happening here as well. As far as the people finally identified that the school season and the growing season are not they don't really match up that well. And so now we're looking into, I keep hearing more and more about minimally processed, and I think that that's really exciting. Are you all looking at a permanent space of your own? Or are you looking at rented space for doing these kind of processing? What's the logistics look like as far as putting that together? Is that going to happen out of the actual hub space? Do you guys have a hub space?
Yeah, we do. Or I guess 2 Octobers ago, we moved into a new space. It's actually an old cannabis processing facility, because as part of that cannabis exodus or consolidation, when we were first planning the food hub, any warehouse or cold storage space was just so outlandishly expensive because they were holding out for cannabis businesses to move in. So we were very lucky that the landlords of this business are huge supporters of the local food system. So when the business, decided to vacate, they contacted us and said hey, we've got a food hub for you, because cannabis and food have very similar requirements. They had a large cold storage room. They have a big aggregation space. We installed a triple basin sink. But so we definitely moved into a space. There was several spaces we were looking at that could have fit what we knew we needed to do. And this space was just sort of a little bit bigger than what we were doing at that moment. But we realized that we were going to, or my hope was that we were going to be scaling up gradually to be able to fit into that space, which is paying off, because now we'll have room to be able to do that minimal processing as well as everything we're currently doing.
Are there, for the schools in y'all's area, are there food safety regulations on what can be purchased by the schools? Because I know here, most of the schools' cafeterias are funded via federal funding, or federal subsidies, and so there's requirements on farms like what's called a GAP audit, good agricultural practices. There's several iterations of that, depending on what you're trying to have audited, but that is a requirement. And for a lot of small farmers in the area, and even the auditors themselves, it's a limitation in that they, an auditor that's going to 1,000-acre farms in Georgia is not going to come to your certified naturally grown quarter acre. And so that's kind of been something we've explored in terms of processing, but I'm wondering what the landscape looks like there as far as getting food into schools, if there's any barriers.
Our schools do not require any sort of food safety certification. However, as we were launching, we were planning to participate in the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program, or LFPA, which is connecting food banks and tribes with aggregators like food hubs. And part of their requirement is that all farms have a food safety plan. So that is something that that is a requirement of all of our farmers, just to sort of have that same standard of food safety. So part of what Amy was talking about, this additional training, is that we do regular food safety plan workshops where we'll just sit down and walk through a template that we have and really help our farmers create food safety plans and think about where all those risks are. The only one of the larger barriers, like we've talked about, is Cal Poly, our university here. However, they have a specialty crop specialist that came and visited us from Texas, where one of the reasons that the university stopped purchasing food from local farmers was just sort of that food safety piece. They got to a sort of national or international procurement company who just didn't trust small farms. They don't have that GAP certification. There's no way to verify this food safety, so we're not going to work with them at all. So one of the benefits of the Food Hub now is that because there is that extra step of oversight, and we can say, yes, we have reviewed all of the food safety plans from our farmers. That's the only reason now that we're able to be at the table and start having these conversations about getting local food back into the university, is because there is that Food Hub and there is sort of that extra stage of like control. It's not just directly from farms, even though we all know that small farms are much more food safe than, all of these mega farms that go to consolidated processing and packaging facilities, which is where a lot of those diseases come from.
Yeah, there's an extension agent here who is not a huge fan of kind of like industrial food safety policies, and always asks presenters to like point out a time in history when a food safety concern was tracked back to a farm of less than 10 acres. Like it's never happened as far as we know. And yeah, it's hard to not, like, looking down the road. It's like if there is enough momentum behind what we're doing here and we're able to actually like compete in a way that like truly compete in a way that sort of compromises the stranglehold the mid supply chain has now, like it's always a concern in the back of my head that like the squeeze is going to come from food safety lobbying at like the federal level, because it's already bad enough. It's already hard enough. And science will be there right behind it. Is like, we can't prove that it hasn't happened, so we're going to say it has, right? We're going to say like small farms are dangerous. We're going to, like, it'd be so easy to present that narrative to Congress and be like, we have to go big because it's not safe for children to be eating food from small farms. And here we are, like, without any advocacy at that level, and groups of farms. So that could potentially be a big battle moving forward. And I think the earlier we can get in, which is why it's so great you're moving on that, Megan, the earlier you can get in and say, like, no, we've been doing this for a decade or 2 decades and no kid has ever complained, and no child has died from salmonella. We're not washing cantaloupes and chicken shit and giving it to kids, and we can prove it. But yeah, that's great. And it seems like Oregon might be a little looser there. We'll work through it. It does make it, for us, it makes it kind of brings it back to like an economical question. Like, is it a viable market to do that when we can actually like feed kids in better ways and more lenient ways for farmers, like through churches and after school events and things like that, without relying on a whole different IQF line or freezing technology that's just to meet a market, along with an audit, food safety audit.
Yeah, the processing side of it too. I'm always curious if there's a pain point of scale that it needs to operate at for it to actually make sense as well. Because as we're thinking, we're at the beginning stages right now, so we're like, well, should we just jump into looking into minimally processed foods and flash freezing and all that? But then it's always a question of like, well, what scale do you actually have to be at to make it viable? Because it looks great on the idea paper, but when it comes into actually implementation, like how much do you need to scale from the beginning to make it economically viable, so you're not just a grant driven scenario?
Yeah, there's an organization in Warrington, North Carolina called Working Landscapes, and they've sort of that's what their model is like specifically. They do processed like greens. It's like that's what they do, and they've been doing it for a while. So I wish they were here to kind of speak to that of how they, how they kind of project their business looking forward. But they do work with a lot of schools, so I think it's kind of off and running now. They know their prices. They know how much is it going to cost to process like 10,000 head of cabbage. Like they can do that math, and I think we're actually looking at ways like across the state to like what would it look like if we sent apples to them and had them processed and frozen and then brought them back and then maybe like grab some other stuff on the way over. So
Yeah, and right now here we actually have more demand than we do production. We've got several larger scale wholesale farmers who we pull from. But we have, for the food hub, we're working with about 40 producers right now. In NCGA's network, we have about 150. So part of what we're doing, like Amy mentioned, is sort of providing different workshops and training opportunities and sort of on-farm gatherings to be able to share techniques of how to scale up your production. Part of what we're collecting is data about, what crops we're selling out of, where the demand is, everything like that. So I feel like, yeah, that's part of the slow intentional growth is, we issued a survey to all of our schools and wholesale buyers saying, what of these items would you buy minimally processed, and sort of try to do a little bit of pricing right off the gate just to know, like, it would be a higher price point. Which of these items would you be interested in purchasing, so that as we start, we'll buy one piece of equipment and just sort of start doing that, get them used to buying that and another piece of equipment. And, we do have grants out for that equipment. So while it's not going to be permanently grant funded in terms of the staff time that's put into it, sort of the way that we're envisioning using these grants is that we try something out on a much smaller scale and use the grants to fund that staff time, because it's not going to be sustainable at the scale that we're doing at, so that when that funding does end, we know we can slowly build up to the scale that we need to be in to cover your expenses, because some of these like larger grants are 2 to 3 years. So you have at least a little bit of wiggle room to really be able to like maybe try out like an A and B track and figure out what's going to work best for you.
yeah, that's exactly it. It's so funny that we're just like we've just figured this out is like you can in so many contexts of like grant funding, whether it's health or economic or environmental, you can use these grant funds to basically pay for your R&D. And that's why like I'm trying to like flip the script in terms of like the language we use here is like these are investment dollars, right? It's like it's social investment that's like trying to work within the system we have and trying to like leverage the good parts of it. Some have to be like invented, and some we can like draw from the past. But yeah, it's just interesting that like we're having a business conversation here, right? But somehow we're just like I think most of the rest of the country is kind of envisioning that would struggle to hear this as that. They would see it as like, here's a bunch of nonprofits talking about like the goody charitable work. But really like at the core, I think of most hubs is like, we're going to prioritize the farmer before we prioritize the consumer, because there is no consumer without the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not like a new thought. People have been running around with bumper stickers that say essentially the same thing for a long time. But again, I think the difference is that we do it. Like we make it happen, and we take the risk that no one else is willing to take. And I think the nonprofit container, or kind of the cooperative container, is a good vehicle for that. Because Megan, and you don't have $5 million of your family's capital just like hanging out in this business. And it's like, if the investment in philanthropic space like has to take risk, and they've just been they haven't been doing it for so long. And I think people are kind of fed up with it, and they're starting to look at those funders and say, like, this is just, particularly in the terms of like how a food bank works. I think the general public is looking at these systems and saying, like, there are grifts on charity right now. Like, the grift is way too high on, the food bank connection with the existing middle supply chain, which is like a very corporate driven entity, or system. And like, why is like one out of $100 showing up at the person who actually needs it, when, again, you have a bunch of liberal arts degrees making $120,000 a year to, run some marketing program for a food bank. Whereas, when farmers get involved, they do things more efficiently. There's a business savvy there that is really kind of like the business foundations of this country, even, is driven by agriculture. So it's an exciting time to be in this. And yeah, just very grateful to hear it from other folks that are thinking the same way, that there's nothing wrong with taking risk with philanthropic or community dollars. Like, it's being grifted on anyway. It's such a better use of it, to take some risk for your community and be there to answer to it too, and be accountable. It's a hard place to be. And I think what we're finding is, like, within these farm communities, people are really, they're really excited for you to take the chance. And when you fail, they're behind you. They're still behind you. Because again, they're doing it every day too. Just on a macro level.
That was a really good riff, Drew. That was a good one.
Yeah, sorry, I can go on
No,
those.
that was what we need, though, because it resonates completely with me, because it's kind of like when we're looking at not being just a monocrop farm, we're looking at being diverse in our farming approach. It's the same way with economics. We're looking for diverse economies. So that means I'm hearing that more and more, is like people using the grant drive to do the R&D, with the idea at the end of the day, you're going to have a for-profit business model that allows it to stand on its own 2 feet. And we're finding that, like, nice compromise in that realm, where we're just like using the tools that are available to us. It's like my farm, I use 1949 tractors to do cultivation, but I also use my iPhone. It's like I'm using all the tools available to me, and I'm not opposed to any of them as long as it's driving the mission forward. And I think that's kind of what you were saying from an economic standpoint, and that's super important. Well, one thing I'm kind of curious about from your hub, Drew, is you mentioned having a lot of different farming approaches, whether it's having a conventional farm supplying to you, as well as a biodynamic farm supplying to you. How have you found that? What extra steps need to be taken to allow that to happen through one hub? Is there a lot of like regulatory oversight or extra paperwork or whatever, or does it just kind of flow pretty easy?
It flows pretty easy, on the kind of the farm and our end. Farmers are typically the people who are very dogmatic, or the farmers that are very dogmatic, whether they've been that way for a long time, or they just discovered that dogma on Instagram, or they get it. Like, they know that there's different subcultures within agriculture of people doing different things, and why they do it. You can't, like, if you've grown tobacco for generations and generations, and you've been just blasting chemicals, of course, like, your family's going to be still using some chemicals because that's what they're familiar with. And I think, like, historically, that sort of, like, that singular kind of channel of, like, what you did with your life, it isn't that far away from here. It's like you grew tobacco and you did it a certain way, and because your father and grandfather and grandmother and, like, entire families did it. So it's not like this idea that you can do whatever you want with your life is still not arrived. And it's kind of nice, like, having that. It's kind of, even though it's ironic, it's kind of freeing to feel that, like, like you have to be outside, you have to be doing some kind of outdoor work, you have to be like leveraging the natural resources in front of you. And so, yeah, there's a lot of understanding amongst the network because when it comes down at the end of the day, they're all small farms like competing in a huge, huge centralized industry. And people are able to like kind of create values around that. On the consumer end, it's way more difficult again. And I really loved your breakdown of like the phases or the 3.0 because, you know, it's really, it rattles you, you know, when someone says like, is it organic? And that's like their primary concern. And really like, it's taken me a long time to not get into the weeds with those folks and try to, you know, try to have like a calm conversation about, you know, why our organization feels like local is more important at this stage. Eventually, yes, we would love to get everyone to a regenerative farming point, but like there are systems of oppression to break down before we get there. You know, we're responding to something like much more villainous than like chemicals. It's like you know, we're responding to a culture, not a corporation first. Like we're voiceless in that too. So there's a lot of, you know, pointing the finger at us, but from the consumer end, pointing the finger at the hub, just because, you know, that consumer's true enemies are kind of out of reach. So, but yeah, as far as in general, and that's again, like if we prioritize our farm community, and like if they're not coming to us in a majority and saying like we want to be organic, and organic only, like they're not going to exclude their neighbors like that. As far as pricing goes, we meet the farmer where they're at. If they're growing, and we have one USDA certified organic grower. The rest are like 50% probably non-certified organic, and then some conventional kind of mixed and no spray. I mean, it's just a really diverse set of practices, and they change too. People change depending on, you know, how many like whether their son comes back from college, like they might have the capacity to not spray that year because they can manage in another way, or they might have an interest in organic, and you know, it fluctuates with scale as well. So yeah, I think, you know, we respond to the consumer end, but it's been really comfortable just within the farm network. People are really understanding, and we do programs like we're engaged in the Climate Smart program right now to try to get some resources to the folks that have been growing this way and not really benefited from it in like a monetary sense. There's some subsidies there, and in leveraging that, and yeah, if we convince a few people in that to try out, you know, organic farming, then great. But, you know, we're not going to pin them down and tell them they have to do it, because we're paying a conventional price on conventional product, and we're paying an organic price on organic product. And so far, when you're so in tune and close with your community, like, you know, when someone's lying to you, and you don't, and that is a bad scene because, you know, as a hub, we don't even have to do anything. Like, we might stop buying, but we don't have to have a conversation because the entire network is like that, like goes against the honor system we're working with here. Like, kind of, how dare you compromise us in that way? So yeah, community building, you know, when you have that, there's not that much to deal with in terms of the distinctions of methodology. What about y'all? I'm always curious in the early stages, because it feels like even more pressure, I think, then, because you're looking for your identity in so many different places, and then there's already these prepackaged identities that people in the community like want you to take, and I think there's a lot of like sorting in those early stages. I certainly see it in the history of our organization, of people kind of being weeded out or, you know, not in alignment.
Yeah, we don't have any requirements for being organic or not. I would say like 99% of the farmers in Humboldt are certified organic, if not using organic growing practices, which, sorry, CDFA, I know I'm not supposed to say it that way, but you know, all of our farmers are, you know, almost all of our farmers are no spray, employing regenerative techniques, using organic products, even if they're not certified organic. So for us, a lot of our customers already have that knowledge of what our growing community is doing. Most of our farmers who are certified organic are wholesale farmers because they know when they're selling to our co-ops or if they're trying to export through veritable vegetable, that they are going to get a higher price, or the price is going to reflect their inputs because they are growing organically. But yeah, we don't have any sort of requirement like that.
Yeah, it's really tough because like in this area, if we were to go in that direction, we would lose all of our fruit. Like we would have no fruit. And yeah, just to appeal to, like a 10, maybe 10% of like direct to consumers, individuals. Like the quality would decrease. It's just the capacity within the small farm network to like maintain organic standards across the board. It's just not there. And it's really weird because like I don't think that was ever the expectation of organic. It was like, 100-year plan, 200-year plan. Kind of the damage done by industry and just in industry across the board. Extractive industry is like that's going to take a lot longer to repair than it took to inflict. So I think, just I wish I could just inject every American with just like a little bit of patience in this process, because it's just such a complex system, and in maintaining your flexibility and adaptability in communities is hugely important right now.
I was curious, do either of you, Chris or Drew, have a component? We have a really strong tribal component up here with the Native American tribes. And the indigenous are really plugging into our food systems. Do you guys, either of you, have that reality there?
We do in our area, but it's not as immediate as it is for you all, I think, down in Northern California. And so, but those are communities that I'm not directly reaching out to them through my work because I'm more focused on the ground with the farmers, but a lot of the like community organizers are definitely tapping into those communities because they're such a valuable part, and they're also they've gotten the short end of the stick in so many ways, so they're really willing to like think outside the box, which I think is really cool. Because so many of us were in these like comfortable, like we were in these comfortable realms for so long that like thinking outside of the box doesn't always happen as easily. But if you're in a this realm of your culture's been compromised for so long, you're really willing to be like, oh, let's try to think about this. So I think there's a lot more communication that's probably going to happen over the next several years. And as we kind of start looking at some of the solution might be kind of like what Drew said, as far as looking regionally. Here, Southern Oregon is so different than as you're working your way up the I-5 corridor. There's a lot of these geographical points that would make sense to be like hubs for processing and stuff like that. And so that's where I think some of the tribal lands probably start making sense, because a lot of people in those communities are also looking for enterprise opportunities themselves, trying to be like, what can we offer? So, and I'm not super educated on that right now, what actually the work's being done, but I just keep hearing that in the food systems conversations we're having here, is like that community is definitely being brought into the fold more. Yeah.
On our end, it's, our demographic, we're kind of in the northeastern part of western North Carolina. The population is overwhelmingly white. I think it's like 98.5, 99% within our area. But the Cherokee Nation further out west is making a lot of headway, from what I understand, into setting up aggregation centers and kind of rebuilding an agricultural community around that. So sort of like all at once, and there's a lot of resources behind that, which is great, because it's much needed and well earned. So yeah, again, just to kind of piggyback on Chris there, once that regional capacity is kind of established, there's no way that's not tied in. There's no way we're not tied into that down the road. If there's anything we can do to support that.
Yeah, and I love that discussion of like regionalizing food systems. At I think our first advisory committee meeting, we were looking at our mission statement, and it said something about local food. And there was this whole, well, should it say Humboldt County? Like, should we only be sourcing food from Humboldt County, versus other counties? And one of the members said, well, historically our land wasn't broken up into counties, like these hard lines that we look at now never defined the way that people or food moved through this region historically. So why should that define us now? Where, yeah, maybe local and regional is more important than really defining a set of miles from a specific radius point or specific county boundaries of where you will and won't source food from, I think is important to start bringing into the conversation.
Definitely. We've started just hearing that so much. And the kind of organic question from the consumer end so often, we've developed we're starting to develop a procurement strategy, which has like different, primary network, secondary network, and then like extended network. And it's sort of like, roughly explains like why we do certain things, because a consumer is never gonna understand, like, yeah, you got your blueberries and they were from another state, but those blueberries came in like 4 pallets, and 3 of those pallets were going to a food bank, and the farmer that was local that you were going to get them from, all of his or her berries split. So we're not going to like drop that buyer and compromise that market for that farmer just because you want blueberries that are hyper local. That's not fair at all in any way. So like, it's almost, so I think like, yeah, we're trying to put together something that clearly explains and has all these hypothetical situations where, something can happen and you have to adjust to sort of maintain the system.
Yeah, something that is happening more and more, at least in California, is this conversation of food hub to food hub sales, which I think sort of goes along that line of, at least if you're working with another food hub, even if it's not grown within your community, you at least know that that food hub has a relationship with the farmer. They're paying a fair price. They probably know the growing practices. So it's better, like you're saying, if you're going to get 0 blueberries or if you're going to get some blueberries from a small farm, it's just not from your specific growing area. So I think that's also another strength of food hubs, is that since we are smaller, we can develop these larger distribution relationships that are still keeping that like food hub to farmer connection.
Yeah, I've thought about that a lot too, and I'm always hesitant to, like, here's kind of the question though, I guess, should we build a name around it? Because like, should it be like food hub certified? I just feel, I see what happened to kind of organic, right, coming out of the West and then becoming a USDA standard, and how much it's changed and continues to change, like in the direction of supporting large corporate farms. So, what would happen? I feel like when people are urged, or when food hub and local food networks are like, once you see the light and you're like, this can be a sustainable business, as a nonprofit or a for-profit, now that it's tied into a larger network, like the marketing aspect of it could like kill it, kill the original soul of it. So there's this tendency among food hubs to just be like, don't give it a name. don't call it anything. Just like be who you are in the community. It's a way of being. It's not like a patch you wear. It's not a tagline. It's just our farmers and our food. But I'm curious of y'all's thoughts on that, like particularly in the West Coast. I'm sure there's a different kind of marketing culture.
I 100% agree. We have been trying to find, like I said, fruit for schools. So I've started to explore this food hub to food hub sales. And I was reached out to by a very small new food hub in Reading who said, yeah, I'm supporting BIPOC farmers, I'm doing all of this, like, let's chat. So we went and we did a single order from him and went out to his farm to pick up strawberries that he had sourced from these BIPOC farmers. And they were literally just like Central Valley, mass grown, really poor quality, probably like extremely sprayed, definitely not organic strawberries. That was one of our fact finding missions. Never again. But when you look at it on paper, like he's a small food hub. He's working directly with BIPOC farmers who are trying to uplift. So I think it's also about food hubs doing our own due diligence and not just believing, what people put out on paper. Because like you're saying, once you call it something, once you say that, it's very easy to just believe it and not do any of your own research about it. So I think also being intentional with how you're finding your producers or your food hubs that you're working with is equally as important as working with a food hub, because I feel like that was the impetus behind food hubs, is that we weren't going to have that same scale of industrial produce coming in through our systems, but clearly that is happening. So just being aware and, developing those relationships so that which food hubs are really staying true to your values and your producers' values.
Yeah, I think like it would be cool to have like an urban hub because like a really like densely urban hub, because I think they would have a different take on that. If you have this sort of like affluent class that you're serving, you can, like, it's probably worth it. Like farmers are probably like, yeah, if you can sell $10,000 or or sell my product for 25% more by calling it a certain thing, like absolutely, I'm on board. And then you look at, this is kind of getting into the rural urban divide question, and then that starts filtering out, right? Because all these people with second homes go to rural areas for the summer and they're like, oh, is it food hub certified, right? Like, oh, I'm not going to buy it. If not that, I'm going to buy it from my urban hub and bring it in. So then like if the market develops to a point, like, yeah, those kind of shifts are very possible. So I'm anticipating a lot of like push and pull, and can you imagine like, I'm really, I always try to stay on top of like who is funding these things in our area, because it really can get away from you. Like, and we started to see it with the agritech thing. And like the worst fear is that like we can't fund what we need funded because somebody in the investment space decided like, oh, I did this research study and found out that like food hubs need this specific thing. And so I'm going to build like a program around it, like cold storage. Like, oh, we did the research study and everybody needs cold storage. And the research was misinformed, and it came from like a university that put like an intern on it. And then suddenly people with millions and billions of dollars of philanthropic investment are just strictly building a program around cold storage when that's not actually the need. My daughter's joining us. All right, you can wash your hands. That's a good idea. Sorry about that. She likes to make an appearance on all the Doomer Optimism shows. She's a real optimist, though. I'm the Doomer, I think. But yeah, I think early on, we really do. We as like kind of the first food hubs to exist in quite a while, or those models to exist in rural communities. We have a big weight on our shoulders to try to maintain kind of our autonomy in this, and our character and individualism, because it will be packaged. It absolutely will be packaged and regurgitated back to us. We will be told at some point, even by like charitable spaces, this is what you will be or you will not be funded. And we see that all the time. Like I mentioned, our population is like 99% white. These aren't wealthy white people. These are like they've had their resources extracted from them for hundreds of years. This is Appalachia. Like, so to be, and we often are, like, we are disqualified in a lot of USDA programs, right? Of like, you must source from BIPOC communities. And we're just like, well, they all got ran off in the early 1900s when everyone was like really racist. So now what do we do? And that will show up in other forms that don't involve race at all, that involve like, socioeconomics and equipment and even industry. Like, I had this question earlier. I was wondering, I was just sort of speculating in my head of like hate to go back to the cannabis industry, but like what that did, like if there was any, because there was such an industry, like keeping it hidden and keeping the process discreet, did that industry then, once it became legalized, have to pivot and say, oh, well, now we're going to try to put a stranglehold on vegetable production and make it appear as if, indoor production is the key. And it's the only like food safe way to do it. It's the only like water safe way to do it. It's the only climate safe way to do it. And now the agri-tech movement is just cannabis production pivoting out of illegality into legality, which is kind of crazy to think about. I don't know all that much about it, but I already see food hubs like kind of dealing with those dynamics. I feel it for sure, and I often feel very crazy saying it out loud because it doesn't always feel heard, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just approaching, being a conspiracy theorist, but it's hard not to look ahead and try to protect your community and your network from kind of this knee-jerk capitalistic packaging of who you are and what you do.
So you're saying, Drew, that you could see where because of oversight and regulation that the trend would maybe be in the future for these food producers to have to go down the route of more overhead via agri-tech kind of approaches to growing food. Is that what you're kind of getting at, or just so I fully understand?
I think I'm sort of getting at is like that will be the only resource available to them
to grow food.
Yeah, like the grants will be organized around that specifically.
Oh, I see.
Right, like from an industry in corporate interest will drive how those are packaged. I'm sure it already happens in other. It's like a grift on compliance. Like, yeah, that has happened throughout history for sure. There's a name for it. Regulatory capture, I think is ultimately what I think I'm getting. That's like one mechanism of how this could happen to food hubs. Is like, and you see it a little bit in food safety, whether it's intentional or not, but it could absolutely be wielded that way in the future. But I think what sort of catalyzed this thought was it also happens in marketing as well. And that's more of like a cultural impulse to require to like make something explain itself, like make an industry explain what it is. And that's kind of like what food hubs aren't. That like food hubs are themselves and really nothing else. We have some of the same, programming. We rely on some of the same resources, but at the end of the day, like our 60 farmers are experiencing, even within themselves, are experiencing like a wide complexity and diversity of situations. So it's very scary to think that like from a national level, we could be packaged in a way that forces us all into some kind of compliance, even more so than we already do. Like we're already responding to a pretty we're responding to a lot of barriers within just sales alone, and trying to be a farmer. So I would hate to, I think we try to stay out of advocacy, but at some point we're going to have to really speak up and with some power behind us. And that power comes from farmers with pitchforks traditionally. So in the way to gain that trust is to pay them a fair price for what they're growing. That's kind of that's the long game there. If you can continue to do that, it feels like you might actually have some influence in those spaces.
Well, I think it's cultural, right? I mean, because I was going back to what you were saying several minutes ago about as far as not naming a food hub anything, like not labeling it as such. There's a power in that, because when I was thinking through the ideology of naming things, like whether it's certified organic or whether it's food hub certified or whatever, the reason that I think that people tend to come up with those labels is because it's supposed to create some sort of less friction, right? Like that's the whole, it's called efficiency, because it takes out the cultural work, because then it allows us to have this like efficiency supposedly to access the culture, and then we don't have to do the cultural work anymore. But what I keep hearing both organizations talking about in today, like the Humboldt organization and then you guys as well, is like we're putting more value on the cultural work that we have to do with the community at large, right? And so we're almost like agreeing to do more legwork culturally and not fall prey to the whole idea of like, well, it'd just be so much easier if we could just go ahead and label it as such, because then that makes it easier for us. And I'm at a point in my life where I'm like, I don't really want that easier. I like interacting with people. I like knowing that who the faces are that are producing food in the restaurants that I'm working with and the grocery stores. I like those people in my neighborhood, like that's important to me. So I think that there's a real strength and power in continuing with that work unlabeled, and it kind of then goes along with what you're saying down the road. If there is more of this compliance that starts coming down the pike, then you get to this point of no return where you're like, you know what? We don't even need these regulatory bodies anymore, because we've built such a cultural hub of community that our community says, I don't need that. It like a really small example of this was one of the first farms that I worked on in Colorado was a full diet CSA. This was in the late 90s, before the whole full diet CSA was a thing. They were just doing it because they were like, we need to feed our community of members and we want to feed them as much as we possibly can. And one of the things they were doing was raw milk. Well, we created this membership model where the members owned the cows and then they just reaped the benefit of owning the cows. And then the farmers were the ones, we were just doing the legwork each day to make sure that we got the milk out of the cows and we processed it. But our membership agreed. They said, we agree that we trust you as the farmers to do this in a good, clean manner. But at the end of the day, we assume the risk of drinking this raw milk. And then on top of that, then it was like the produce and then bread production and grains and meat and all of that. And so I find ourselves going full circle with some of these bigger aggregation models now, that we're like going back to trusting each other, trusting our community, that we can actually show up for each other instead of just becoming this faceless entity. I think that's some of the shift that we're seeing happening right now.
Yeah, I feel like all the time I hear when people talk about Harvest Hub, like buyers, they're just like so grateful that there's people for them to talk to. Like they email me and I email them back the same day. They can call me on my phone and I pick up and they know that they're talking to me and that we can like figure out whatever the issue is. They're not having to like push a bunch of buttons and say the right word to like whatever automated system to get to the right department. Like they know me, they know my name, they know my cell phone number. And that's just so invaluable in today's society.
Yeah, what is that? What is that Schumacher book? The Small is Beautiful, right? A scale if people mattered. I think that's the one.
It almost seems to me that like food hubs are the epitome of like organic, bioregional. Like no two are going to be the same. Like even us talking here right now, we all have very different environments and regions that we work within. So to adapt a cookie cutter stamp on top of it, it almost like trying to put a square peg in a round hole kind of situation, that we need to be adaptable and diverse in order to in order to work in our specific regions and communities. So I hope that we continue doing that specific thing and that we're recognized for that. I feel like in California, even small farmers have a lot of support and advocacy with CAF, Community Alliance for Family Farmers, and those kinds of organizations, FarmLink, that are actually advocating on the state level on our behalf, at least as much as I know. Megan might have a different perspective on that, but yeah, I would, that's a very big cringe factor to think that we might get this huge regulatory oversight that kind of abolishes all that we've worked for. But like you're saying, Drew, like as the stronger we are before any of those potential regulations come in, is a good place to be.
And let me bring the optimism side to that doom of compliance. Like potentially, and I'm not like a huge believer in like the decommodification of food. I don't really know what would ensue from that, but like if hubs have strong networks, particularly rural ones, right, and we're forced into this compliance of like, there's always going to be the rule, like if you're not selling something, then it's like not as illegal to do it. so I think like we could end up at a point where we're actually fully sustained non-monetarily, like by a community with like sweat equity and sharing equipment and skills and talent. And like, 50 years down the road, we could see like just a full-on new economy develop out of farms. Like, honestly, I feel like if it's going to happen in any industry, it is agriculture, and it's going to happen from small rural farms in small communities, because we're already having to like create out of thin air, well, not out of thin air, but we're already having to create this food hub model to solve a problem that is very much, that's very much just a symptom of centralization. So yeah, I think that compliance could encourage a lot of even more creativity in this space, to where, shoot, we don't even need jobs. We're just running farms and feeding each other. I think there's a culture in a group of people who want to do that, and that might even provide even more connectivity, because then you might see a lot of these models line up in the same way, right? Like if you strip the money and the economy out of farm systems, like they actually do look pretty similar, it seems like. But because we're all in these different areas trying to like dealing with all of these factors, of where the money's at and how to get it and how to get the resources from the community, from the state level, from the federal level, that's really what's so disrupting, I think, to change at this point. So it might be a good thing, if the compliance, bites a little harder, might send us into a different sort of revolution.
Harder is better sometimes. It is, really. It was the first 10 years of us farming in this area of Southern Oregon. Honestly, people are like, how did you do it? And you're like, the audience was so captive in those first 10 years that we were here. It was like, right, we just got lucky, and it timed just right with the local community was open to it. There was like no limit to what we could produce and throw at things. And then it was like after year 10 or 12 was when we saw the shift happen, and we're like, oh, now we got to get really creative with this and really work a bit harder. So that's kind of why I'm up for the challenge this go around, is like, okay, well, it's not smooth sailing, but there's still, people still are needing to eat, I'm pretty sure. Is there anything that any of you want to touch on before we wrap up today? I'd love to go down any rabbit holes that any of you want, or any ideas of directions after today or follow-ups, or I'm just open to anything. I'm just curious where everybody's at.
I don't have anything specific. Yeah, thanks for facilitating, Chris. It was awesome. Lots of interesting things to talk about. I think it would be cool to do this again, with some more folks, or certainly have it. I'm always interested in the urban perspective, just because it's such a different experience, and different understanding of like food systems there. I'm curious because there seems to be like this level of engagement that's like way more. There's like the general population in those areas has like this capacity to engage that you don't really see in rural areas. And I'm wondering if it's because it's like this new exciting thing, or there really is truly like a almost religious connection to food that people are experiencing there. But yeah, I think this is a much bigger conversation than this episode alone. And really grateful for everything y'all are doing, particularly out west. It's a different world, but a lot of similarities here.
Yeah, and I just put a call out to anybody listening to this that if you're involved in the world of food hubs or interested or whatever, I'm sure any of us would be open to an email, hitting us up for more information and making those connections out there. I think it's super important. I love reaching out to farmers, but now as I'm getting more into these like greater advocacy works, like meeting other people that are doing other work. So I'm always open to hearing what other people are up to, and I'll definitely leave links in the show notes as far as a way to get hold of any of us. And yeah, I think it would be really cool to have another follow-up episode with other folks on and just getting other insights, because I too am always curious about that urban rural connect/disconnect. There's a lot of mystery going on there. I really want to figure it out.
I definitely think it's worthy of a check in after a year to see how the food hubs are going with the political climate that we're going to be seeing ourselves in. And I do feel like our food hubs are only going to get stronger, just the same way the pandemic was really hard, but what bloomed out of that for North Coast Growers Association is huge and amazing, and a really, really resilient. So I would like to see that, conversation continue and with updates and see how everybody's doing.
I think we can make that happen. Well, this has been great. I think otherwise we're good to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great to meet you all. Let's stay connected if possible. But if there's anything we can do to support, I'm happy to do it.
And I think Drew and Megan, I feel like you guys are going to be really important ambassadors to help build other regions' resiliency plans. And I'm so thankful that you're both out there and really receptive to responding to people. I think it's going to become really important. So thank you.
My 2024 quote is, "A rising tide lifts all ships."
Yeah.
All of my conversations this year, I feel like that just like embodies it, like let's support each other, let's share our knowledge, and let's figure out how all of our projects and our knowledge and connections can really just like lift everyone up.
Agreed.
Yeah. And Amy, thanks for that encouragement. I think it does get really hard at times, being in a leadership position in representing, small community agriculture. So it helps. So I can't overstate how important it is to have like a board of directors or a community that's kind of like can stand behind you even when you really fuck something up. Because it's really hard out there. Like we are entering the void, and you can't do it alone. You can't bear it alone. And I've seen, executive directors and business owners just like destroyed in this process. So holding it together and keeping people with a aligned in vision is super important. And paying people, but y'all are pretty good at that on the West Coast, getting people getting people paid like more than minimum wage.
Not in the cannabis industry, though. Nobody gets paid in the cannabis industry on time or even gets paid. Food is better.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I think out here the cannabis industry might be better because it's still illegal. But yeah, little risk. Funny how that works.
Yep. All right, everyone. Thanks so much. We'll
thank you.
catch up again soon.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Yep. Have a great
You
day,
too.
everyone.
You too.
Yeah.
Okay. See ya.